Hello and welcome back to Asian Cinema Season 2 and continuing on with the Hirokazu Kore-eda reviews. I've been very much enjoying delving into this filmmaker's filmography and watching his films, and it's kind of fun to do it out of sequence in a lot of ways. So we've gone from I Wish to Like Father, Like Son, then back to Still Walking, and now I'm going to be talking about his 2015 film, Our Little Sister. I'll get you a shot without the glare. There we go. And this film, to me, from what I'd seen and kind of read and heard about Kore-eda's movies, this is kind of a nice kind of sickly sweet kind of drama that he made in between some of his better films, like Father, Like Son, or Still Walking, etc. So when I popped this in, I really wasn't expecting the film that I got. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this video, of course. So Our Little Sister is about three women who live together. They're three sisters. Their father has recently passed away. Their mother left them many years ago, and their grandmother took care of them. But for the most part, at this point in their lives, in their late 20s, they're kind of self-sufficient. They live together like a little family in this house that was left to them by their mother. And they find out that their father has passed away, so they travel back for his funeral, and they meet his other daughter that he had with another woman, the mistress that he left his wife, their mother, for to begin with all those years ago. So they have a new half-sister that they've never met before called Suzu. And I can't remember the names of the three main sisters off the top of my head. What I loved about these characters was that they are also clearly defined in the way that they are performed, and I would imagine written as well. We have the kind of the oldest sister, who is, for all intents and purposes, the head of the family, the mother of the family of these three women, and she, very much serves that motherly kind of maternal role in that household. She's kind of stern at times. She's not someone who won't have a bit of fun, but she's certainly a character who is very kind of, she's a bit more proper than the other two. She's more of a career woman. She's a nurse. She works with terminally ill patients in a hospital, and so she feels like the most responsible and adult of the three sisters. And then we have the next sister down in terms of age, who we see at the very beginning of the film, in bed with a man, and so her life seems to revolve around the men in her life. She likes to drink beer, and seems a bit more loose than the older sister. And then we have the youngest, who it seems like a very carefree kind of spirited person. She works in a sports store, she has a boyfriend, she's always smiley, always happy, and just seems to live a very kind of carefree life. So they all have different roles, and you feel like they all love each other. They rub each other the wrong way, like any family member does with each other. When you live that closely with someone all the time, regardless whether they're blood or not, they're gonna wind you up in certain ways. So they got that family dynamic, that sisterly dynamic, pitch perfect, I think. Not that I've ever been a woman or have had sisters, but I just feel like those kind of familial bonds that you have with your family, I think anyone can relate to those, whether you have sisters or brothers or not. I didn't grow up with brothers or sisters. I have two brothers and a sister. Well, three brothers. My first brother died before I was born, but I've had brothers and sisters, but I never grew up with brothers and sisters. Very weird for me. When I was born, my first brother had already passed away, and then I lived until I was, I guess, I would have been 16, 17 when my brother came along. So I had a very kind of non-sibling, growing up period in my life. So I never quite felt that. But regardless, if you have a family, you know what it feels like. And so I think that they captured this perfectly with these three sisters. Then we introduced very early on in the film this fourth sister, Our Little Sister. My only criticism of the film, well, I have two criticisms. The first one is Suzu. She, obviously is the daughter of, their father, who they hadn't seen and is estranged from the family. But when they go to the funeral, the three sisters, they meet their new half-sister, Suzu, and they kind of, they speak to her and try to get to know her a little bit. They can see she's a very mature girl for her age, and that they suspect that she was the one caring for their father in the last days and perhaps even weeks, months of his life. And they see the burden that has been placed on this young girl in caring for her sick father. And so they ask her if she wants to come and live with them in the house. And she takes them up on this offer. Now, at first I thought this was like a summer thing, like a couple of months. But as the film progresses, you see that this is a permanent change for Suzu, and she goes to live with her sisters permanently. And it made me wonder, why doesn't she stay with her mum? We've already established that Suzu is a self-sufficient person, that she's kind of almost been forced due to the incapabilities of her mother to kind of be a strong and adult person. So why wouldn't she want to be around her mother? But from what I understand, not that it's ever really explicitly stated, the mother that we see at the funeral isn't really Suzu's mother. That's her stepmother. So the timeline is, I think, and if anyone has seen the film and knows more about it than I do, I was trying to rack my brains if I'd missed a certain detail, but the timeline as I see it is, the three sisters are born by their mother and father. Their father cheats on their mother, has his mistress. They get together. They have Suzu. The three sisters' mother, she leaves them, so they're stuck with their grandmother, and then they kind of grow to be self-sufficient over the next decade and a half. And then Suzu's mother leaves or dies, and then her father remarries. So when we get to the funeral, when the sisters meet their new half-sister, they're seeing her stepmother, not her real mother, excuse me. So that makes so much more sense to me. If it was more clearly defined at the beginning, then I would understand why Suzu would be ready to jump at this opportunity to live with her family, who are more connected to her by blood than her stepmother is. But also, it makes it even more emotional and impactful to know that this is now a girl whose both parents have died. But I still don't know if that's the case. If it isn't, and if that really was her blood mother who she left, that just seems a bit odd to me. But I don't think that's the case, because they mention that their father has remarried a few times, or at least a couple of times. So you're having these three sisters whose parents left them. Both of their parents left them. And then we have this young girl whose parents had been taken away from her. And now we have these four sisters under this one roof. And I gotta tell you, this film, I loved everything about it, except for that one nitpick. And the other nitpick actually is that there's a subplot revolving around a restaurant diner by the seaside, and it's the owner there and her boyfriend. That wasn't very clearly set up either, and I realized it more towards the end of the film, which is kind of fine, I guess, that you kind of get pieces of the story as it goes on. But also those sections weren't really gelling with the rest of the film to me, though they did pay off at the end, because at near the end of the film, we have quite an emotional connection to the woman who runs this diner, because she has kind of watched these girls grow up, and she has a very kind of intimate connection with them. At one point, all four of the sisters come into her restaurant, and she's like, wow, this is the first time you've all been in here together at the same time. So it does mean something, but I feel like it wasn't set up enough with enough kind of, I don't know. And it's difficult because Kore-eda certainly seems like a director, a storyteller who just doesn't like to feed you that information as if you're a child. There's exposition in almost any film, but he's really light on kind of setting things up like that. Though there is one scene actually where one of the sisters goes to see their great aunt, played by the great Kirin Kiki, who, the scene is very kind of unnatural, where she's like, oh, it's you, my great aunt, and like they kind of talk to each other in terms of who they are in the family, which just seemed completely unnatural to me. So this film isn't without flaws, but these are micro flaws. These are flaws that mean nothing compared to the rest of the film, which I was completely in love with. This is a film that, when it was over, I had a day off when I watched it, and I was like, okay, this will be film number 1 of the day, and I'll watch another few films that I wanted to get to. This was the only film I watched. I spent the rest of the day just thinking about this film and wishing that the next film I was going to watch would just be this instead. Now, I didn't end up watching it again because I think you can have too much of a good thing, but it's so rare to watch a film and afterwards feel like, man, I really wish the next film I watch would just be this all over again for the first time. I loved it. I thought it was phenomenal. I thought it was emotional. It made me cry. And when I say that, I always have to kind of, clarify that, tears fell from my eyes. I wasn't bawling or anything. Oh my God, so emotional. But, when you can't stop the tears from actually trickling down your face, I think that's when a film has really done its job. And you can certainly look at this as a melodrama. I'm kind of a fan of that genre. I like having my heartstrings tugged at. If it's done in a way that makes me buy and believe the characters, and I don't feel like I'm being manipulated by the story or the acting. There is a beautiful moment at the beginning of the film when they first meet their new sister, and they go up onto this kind of hilltop that overlooks kind of the surrounding areas, and the four of them are stood there. This has been the funeral of their father. It's an odd time for all of them for different reasons, and they're looking out, and we see the side of Suzu's face, and they're asking her about her father, their father, and saying, you cared for him in those last days, didn't you? It wasn't your stepmother or mother, whichever it turned out to be. And you can see this young girl is now getting emotional, and a tear rolls down her face, but it's not on the side facing the camera. Now, from what I've seen in interviews with Kore-eda and also the behind-the-scenes documentaries I've seen on his films, it seems to me like he's a director who very much embraces the accidental. He's someone who doesn't try to control every single detail, and when these kind of happy accidents happen, these serendipitous moments happen, he embraces them and he uses them in his film. He was talking about a certain scene in Father Like Son, which to me, I thought, wow, that was a really great directorial choice to have the kind of shadows come there. And he said in the behind the scenes, that happened by accident, and we just went with it. So I would be so blown away if it turned out he had said to this young actress in Our Little Sister, okay, I want you to cry, I want you to have a single tear coming down, but on the side away from the camera, so it's not as obvious, so it's not as kind of it doesn't feel like as much of a ploy. Because whenever I see someone in a film and it's that kind of the single tear rolling down, their eyes are unblinking, it feels so unnatural to me. I love it in a film when someone cries and they're like this, they're hiding up their face, because that's what we do, It's so unnatural for the most part, not that it doesn't happen, but for the most part it's so unnatural for someone to just let the tear roll like that without wiping it away. So I love seeing that detail when it gets wiped away, but in this instance, it is a case where a single tear rolls down, but it's on the side away from the camera. So it felt like it wasn't kind of inviting us in to this emotion, hey, look at this sadness. It was more like, there's sadness here, but it's kind of, we're withholding some of it. It's kind of behind the face. She's trying to hold this back. She's not showing you everything. She's not bearing her soul to these women who are her new sisters. She can't control her emotions, but she's trying to keep it at bay at the same time. Now, that's me reading into something that I truly believe is an accidental, moment that wasn't planned. There was no way in my mind that anyone said to this girl, can you try and get a tear to come out of the side of your face that's on the other side of the camera? But it was a moment that just stood out so much to me. And then these little micro moments, I keep coming back to that with Kore-eda's films, is these micro moments that mean so much. There's a scene that's probably a minute long between the youngest of the three sisters, the more carefree, sister, whose hair is always a mess. I love that she's such an endearing character. They're all endearing in their own ways. And it's her and Suzu, and they're sitting down, they're eating some food together, getting kind of a one-to-one with each other, which they hadn't had in the film really up to that point. And you realize really that Suzu knew their father probably better than they did, because they hadn't seen him for 15 years. And maybe the oldest, or the older two of the sisters, knew him more, but this kind of younger of the three sisters, she was very young when their father left. So she's sitting there with her new half-sister, thinking, you knew our dad more than I ever remembered him. What can you tell me about him, when you're ready? And Suzu basically gives her this very kind of almost meaningless story, where she just says, he liked to fish. On the weekends, he liked to fish, and sometimes he'd take me with him. That's it. That's all she tells her, but she gives that to her sister. And the look on her face when she is given this piece of information, which is so small, but it's something that kind of illuminates a picture in her mind of who her father might have been. And while she probably has mixed feelings on the fact that he left, at this point, he's gone, and it's just, you hold on to those little things and those little details, and you'll take whatever you can get. and it's all a part of feeling alive and connected with your family. And just, I thought it was a beautiful moment between these two sisters, which is just, it's just played as just another scene. That it isn't kind of built up as this emotional thing, but to me, it was so impactful. The look on her face as she kind of, it was almost like a grateful look, but she was still her kind of carefree, happy self, So I loved the way that all of those four actresses felt so true to their characters in every scene that they're in. They felt like they were sisters. They felt like they loved each other. The way that they welcomed Suzu into their life and into their family is just so endearing and beautiful and touching in a very subtle way, I think. There's sentimentality in the film, and there's kind of the opposite of that as well. And I thought it was fantastic. I loved everything about it except for the minor nitpicks, which for me are just going to just gloss into the background when I watch it again. And this is going to be a film I'll go back to again and again and again. This is going to be a comfort film for me. It's just a film about four women who stand by each other's sides and kind of get at each other's throats, but ultimately still love each other and are there for each other. And they talk about how, when are they all going to move out of this house? When are they all going to kind of get married and kind of, all that kind of stuff. And so that kind of plays into the film at certain times, especially with the older sister and this man who she's kind of having a fling with at work, who is married, and he wants to divorce his wife and go off with her. That's when she realizes that this would be doing the same thing that her father did, only she would be the quote-unquote evil one that's taking a man away from his wife. So they play into that, and they play into the whole kind of sordid backstory of their parents' lives, or their father's life, really, but also they deal with their mother who left them, and certainly isn't without blame. And I love the sequence between the eldest daughter and their mother, who, those two are very much at odds with each other. The eldest daughter, who took on the mantle of being the mother to these, to her sisters in a way, she feels the most kind of vitriol and kind of anger, real anger towards her mother. And so it's those two that get the scene where they kind of try to reconnect with each other, which I thought was a really brilliant and understated sequence. And I think it ties into the Japanese culture as well, where everything is, how do I put it? In the UK, the way that I've grown up, the way that I've known my family and all that kind of stuff, are very open. Lots of hugs, kissing. I still kiss my dad, on the cheek, of course. But, it's that kind of thing where it's just like, you tell your family, I love you, and you give them a hug because you never know, right? And you give them a kiss on the cheek. In Japan, from what I've seen, that stuff is not so much a no-no, but it's not the done thing. So, I'll watch these scenes in movies like this where I just want the characters to say, just tell them you love them, so they know. But that's not the way it works. So for me, as an outsider looking in, it makes it all the more subtle, and I find more meaning in what isn't said, and I don't find it like, oh, why aren't they telling each other they love each other? It's like, well, because they do it differently, and so it's more involving at times to watch dramas from different countries where the culture of that is different. Maybe I'm completely off base on that and I'm wrong, I don't know, from what I've seen in films, which you shouldn't use to dictate, how everything is in the real world, but it just seems that kind of stuff is a bit more nuanced, and again, meaning without the words being there. And that is certainly, at least in Kore-eda's films, is what I found, is that kind of sensibility in the way characters express themselves, and how they tell each other they love each other without really saying those words. Anyway, so I would love to hear kind of thoughts on that, if anyone has any kind of words of wisdom to share regarding that. But that's the way I felt about Japanese dramas for a very long time, and I think it's one of the reasons I really love them, because it's just a different style, and it's not to say that someone's entire society and culture is a style, but it's a different style of storytelling and a different style of seeing people connect with each other that, to me, just makes it more interesting and more involving for some reason. As much as I love, American, British dramas where people do tell each other they love each other, and that's very sweet and endearing too, but I really enjoy being endeared and charmed and touched by more subtle ways of communication, I think. Anyway, Our Little Sister, for me, is far and away my favourite Kore-eda film. I don't think it's his best. I think his best film I've seen is probably Still Walking. I think that's kind of a masterpiece in its own right. And Like Father, Like Son is really, I think that's probably maybe the best story in his films that I've seen so far. But this is far and away my favorite. The one that I enjoyed the most, the one that I'll go back to more than any other. I absolutely loved it, and it's just loving these four characters so completely. Not a bum note between any four of these actresses. I think my favorite was the eldest sister, but also even down to some of the minor characters, like the woman who ran the diner and her boyfriend, played by Lily Frankie, who was one of the fathers in Like Father, Like Son. He's a really good actor, and I really liked the scene with him, like the last scene his character has in the film. I loved it. I can't wait to see it again. I only wish it had the special features, because there was a making of and all that kind of stuff, but it was not ported over to the UK Blu-ray, sadly. And I really wish this had been included in the Arrow Academy Family Values set. If there's ever a film that's about family values, it's this film right here, and I would have loved for that set to have been padded out, not padded out like it's being kind of filled up for space, but to be expanded with this film, and to have the special features brought in for a UK release. But it is what it is, I guess. But I loved the film so much. Cannot recommend it highly enough. And yeah, I feel like I've kind of peaked here. I can't imagine a film of his being more enjoyable than this one. But I'd be surprised and delighted if there was. So I look forward to seeing more. I'll probably try and squeeze out a couple more reviews and viewings of his films. Now, again, this is like Naoko Ogigami. This is one of the great discoveries of this year for me, is discovering this incredible filmmaker's work. I just love his subtle, understated, yet meaningful and slightly sentimental lens that he places over his films. But apparently his earlier stuff is a lot more experimental and art house in nature, and it seems like his later career over the past 10 years or so has leaned more into that kind of Ozu style, not completely, but that kind of more of the kind of the again, family values, and also slower kind of meaningful kind of drama, I guess. Again, I kind of refrain from using the term melodrama so much, but that's kind of what it is in a sense, where it really is built to make you emotional, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I also loved the music. The music was beautiful, and also the editing style I quite enjoyed. Apparently this was adapted from a manga, or at least a book or a graphic novel called Seaside Diary, I believe, translated to English. And Kore-eda actually wanted to adapt it years before this, and the rights to the book were already taken. And then he was notified years later that it was now available, so he jumped on that, and he really liked it. He liked the kind of things it was saying, so he wanted to adapt it into a feature-length film. And I feel like there's something else. Yeah, so it feels episodic at times, where we'll have a sequence and then it'll kind of slowly fade out, and then we'll fade in, and the passage of time is very natural in the kind of the way that Suzu settles into this life. There's also a little mini romance for Suzu when she goes to school, and this young boy who kind of likes her. And it's so understated, and there's a moment between the two where you think he's going to tell her he really likes her, or they're going to kiss. And they don't, but it's all over their faces that there might be something there. And that's it, they leave it. I love that. It felt so true to life, where life isn't always like a movie where people say the right things at the right times, when it feels like an appropriate movie moment. Yeah, in real life, they just don't quite come out with the right words. So that was another part I loved. And again, I just loved all four of the actresses. I cannot state that highly enough. To me, this would probably even crack my top 100 favorite films of all time, I think, and that's just on one viewing. So I will leave it there. I've waffled on for far too long, but it was a film I really wanted to talk about, and I could probably talk more about it as well. But like I said, the music was beautiful and tied everything together for me. Very emotional and stirring, and yet naturalistic slice of life movie that is a style I really enjoy, and it's been done to a degree in this film that I think has entertained me and pleased me and made me feel full emotionally in my soul, which, God, that sounds wanky saying it out loud, but that's exactly how I feel after watching a film like that. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next review.
It's alright by me. Apart from the fact he throws cans of Carlin into a tree. Yeah, he's really cool. Yeah, he's really cool. But he's not quite as cool as you, 'cause